Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you once again and welcome you all to today's session, this roundtable discussion on Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. We have an announcement. Our President, Mr. Abraham Stephanos, he is on his way and there's a road diversion, so he's taking a bit of time to join us today. I would request Mr. Debe Mukherjee, immediate past President of the Bengal Chamber, to formally welcome all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angona, and gives me great pleasure, despite the heat. I know it's a scorching heat outside, but to welcome all of you to this very important, I thought it would be a roundtable discussion, but be that as it may, whatever be the form of the discussion, but we are more interested in the outcome. And that's, I think, more important and quite appropriate in light of the FTAs that we see are getting signed, and which is a steady progress that we see. First, we had the Indian FTA with the UAE, Australia being the second. Hopefully, UK should be the third. And definitely all this goes to show and giving very clear indicators as to how the global geopolitics and global trade is progressing. In the context of Australia-India, there's been a significant growth in bilateral trade. It looks like something $13–14 billion in 2007-8, to more than 24 billion last year, 2020. That shows a significant growth in bilateral trade. And then, was it the 2nd or the 4th of April, we signed the Australia-India Joint Economic Cooperation Agreement, and which is, I think, the subject of discussion, and what it implies, what are the nuances of the agreement and understanding, and how it affects business, especially in light of the eastern part of the country. We would very much like to know from the experts who are around. And once again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Rowan. I remember after you came over to Calcutta, we met, and I really admired your sari, if you remember. Yeah, that was some time ago. That's right. Yes, exactly. It was around this time. Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much for coming over and initiating this discussion. And let's hope we have a very interesting and a fruitful outcome of our discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have with us today Mr. Rowan Ainsworth, Consul General, Australian Consulate General in Kolkata, to share the overview of the FTA. Understanding the FTA, Dr. Prabir, Professor, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, or RIS, he has joined us from New Delhi. He is on the screen. Expected outcome of Indo-Australian FTA and the likely impacts to Indo-Australian bilateral trade. Mr. Hugh Boylan, Economic and Public Affairs Counsellor, Australian High Commission, New Delhi, he has joined us in the chamber. And the industry perspective would be shared by Mr. Debarka Chakraborty, Principal Consultant, Dastur Company, Private Limited, with a special focus on clean energy transition. With this, I would welcome all, and I would request the Consul General Rowan Ainsworth to please share the overview of the FTA.
Thank you very much. Angana, thank you very much for that lovely introduction and for inviting me here today. Very much appreciated. It really is a pleasure to join you all today to talk about the opportunities in the Australia-India relationship, and that is simply because there are so many opportunities available to us now. Our relationship is reaching new heights, and as you know, there have been two developments in particular recently which underline our country's ambition for the elevation of the relationship. The first is an update to the India economic strategy, including the Australian government's $280 million, that's 1,500 crore rupees, $280 million of funding for new cooperation proposed in the update. So this is a copy, and I think it's available for those of you who are interested to take home. We've got copies to distribute to everybody. And the second is the signing on the 2nd of April, as you mentioned, of the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or the ECTA as we're referring to it. These initiatives are a very real demonstration of our close bonds and aligned interests, and importantly, our mutual trust. Both sides understand and appreciate that our economies are highly complementary, and we can provide the inputs that support India's burgeoning high-tech industries. And we recognise the mutual benefits of working together as partners and as friends, except in cricket, of course, which is an exception. Although even in IPL, I guess we're doing okay working together. Go Kolkata Knight Riders, sorry people from Delhi. The update to the India economic strategy builds on Australia's 2018 seminal report, which recognised the importance of India and Australia to each other's economic prosperity over the coming decades. I'm personally a big fan of the original strategy. It identified 10 key states and 10 key sectors and made numerous recommendations, but one of those recommendations was to open a consulate here in Kolkata. And that is the reason that I'm able to be here speaking to you today. And that was simply a recognition of the importance of Eastern India to the relationship with Australia. The original strategy looked at the relationship out to 2035, and it was an enormous tome of 500 pages. As you can see, the update is somewhat more sharply focused. It looks at the coming 5 years, and it's a practical action plan for Australia to achieve its long-term economic ambitions with India. And it's a clear signal of our strong ongoing commitment. So what are those long-term economic ambitions, you might be asking? Well, they haven't actually changed since the original India economic strategy was released in 2018. We would like to deepen economic integration with India, and more specifically, make India one of Australia's top 3 trade and investment destination partners. But while our ambitions have not changed, the world has changed. This update responds to those changes, recognising the evolving challenges and opportunities for both countries. It takes into account the transformed global environment, including, for example, the lessons learned during COVID and India's economic reform agenda. The initiatives and programs in the update cover the breadth of our shared priorities across economic, trade, infrastructure, culture, education and skills, standards, agriculture, public administration and governance, resources and energy, science and innovation, defence, cyber and critical technology interests. The update takes us through 26 fully funded initiatives, including an Australia-India Innovation Network to help firms access investment and to commercialise, a standards and conformance trade enabling program to ease barriers for exporters in both directions, an Australia-India Infrastructure Forum to smooth the path to investment in India's vast infrastructure plans, a boost to the existing Australia-India Strategic Research Fund, which will ensure a dedicated ongoing stream of research with India, support for increased research, production and commercialisation of renewable energy technologies, as well as for green steel, a package of initiatives supporting critical minerals, including research to unlock the commercial and security benefits of greater critical minerals value chain integration between Australia and India, a joint Australia-India Centre of Excellence for Critical and Emerging Technology Policy to build on our shared capacity and technology, and a global mining challenge, which will connect Indian miners facing technical and operational challenges with world-leading Australian solutions. Importantly, it also includes Australian government investment in a new Centre for Australia-India Relations to propel and strengthen our community, institutional and business ties. And the centre will administer a suite of what we're calling Maitri scholarships and fellowships, as well as a new cultural partnership. The scholarships and fellowships are designed along the same lines as Rhodes or Fulbright scholarships, but will be offered exclusively to Indian citizens. Complementing these initiatives, we're also establishing a task force to agree recognition of academic qualifications. These many initiatives will reinforce our bilateral architecture and help us realise the promise of our relationship. There are many more initiatives in here. These are just the ones that seemed more relevant to Eastern India, to this region. And I guess it's a sort of an underpinning to the ECTA. The ECTA tells us about specific, well, it eases trade, very specifically. This gives us the network, the framework, in which we can use ECTA to best effect. And so, ECTA. On the 2nd of April, Ministers Goyal and Tien signed our bilateral economic cooperation and trade agreement. This is really a major milestone in our relationship. Trade and investment are growth engines for our economies, and this agreement gives our business people the tools, the incentive and the focus to move forward. So you have there, I believe, our placemat, and that gives a snapshot of ECTA. You can examine the detail at your leisure at the website address down the bottom here, or at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website. But this placemark gives you the headlines. Indian consumers and businesses will benefit from the immediate elimination of tariffs on 85% of Australian goods exports to India, while Australian consumers will benefit from almost 96% of Indian goods imports entering Australia duty-free. This means cheaper Australian inputs into Indian manufacturing, for example, with tariffs eliminated on coal, alumina, and critical battery minerals such as nickel, lithium, and cobalt. ECTA also expands work and mobility and study opportunities across a range of professional services and specialist occupations. Australia will extend post-study work rights for STEM students and offer new access for young Indians to take up work and holiday visas in Australia. Minister Goyal noted the pact will contribute towards large employment generation. Labour-intensive sectors in India, such as jewellery, textiles, leather, footwear, carpets, furniture, food and agriculture, would be set to gain the most. The agreement provides immediate benefits, such as tariff cuts. It is also about providing greater certainty and predictability about access to each other's markets. And there's a certain head-turning effect as well. We're very happy to have more Australian companies thinking about India as a destination, as well as vice versa. And that's just the start. ECTA is the prelude to the negotiation of a full comprehensive economic cooperation agreement between Australia and India. The full agreement will do even more to eliminate tariffs and remove the red tape that impedes trade. Now, it does need to be said that while union governments or central governments negotiate these trade deals, it's at the state level that the rubber hits the road. Last week, I attended the Bengal Global Business Summit, as I'm sure a lot of you did. Our High Commissioner, Barry O'Farrell, came down from Delhi to lead Australia's business delegation, a delegation that was keen to increase partnerships and investments here in this region. And it was really heartening to see the West Bengal government working to improve ease of doing business here in this state and to bring together businesses, local businesses with international businesses. Hearing Dr. Mitra's glowing figures on West Bengal's economic growth, businesses here are in pole position to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the new pact. But of course, concluding a trade cooperation agreement is only part of the picture. Australia and India have set a targeted and strategic direction for our relationship. As members of the G20, which India will host next year, we both understand the importance of working across the breadth of our shared economic, strategic, and regional interests to build networks that support the entire region, the Indo-Pacific region. The success of this relationship, the Australia-India relationship, sets the backdrop for greater prosperity in the Indo-Pacific for every nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Consul General Ainsworth. Now we would request Dr. Prabir, Professor, RIS, New Delhi, online with us to please share his understanding of the FTA. Dr. They can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. We can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, for the invitation. And thank you, Mr. Abraham Stefanos, Ms. Rowan Ainsworth, the Consul General, other dignitaries on the dais. Sorry, I could not make it, so I thought to take the advantage of virtual format to share some of my perspectives on Australia-India ACTA. So as the previous speaker rightly said, this is just a beginning. And to me, this is an historical deal. Started in 2009. In between, there was a gap, but ultimately we could manage to conclude and sign the agreement. That's very good. And India's achievement, if you look at it, the India and Australia, this bilateral FTA, this is a comprehensive type, even though it is an early harvest scheme going towards the deepening the relations over time. But this is a good beginning, particularly in the post-RCEP phase. As you know, that India and Australia, the bilaterals was started in 2009, very soon when India was also negotiating several bilaterals in the RCEP countries. And India's coming out of RCEP in 2019, there was a gap and there was a crisis, if I may say it this way. So this today, India-Australia bilateral agreement is an attempt to narrow the gap and raise India's understandings in this position globally. In particular, I think this bilateral FTA is just simply not a single entity. Is total India's and Australia's their global engagements. India and Australia are partner in WTO. They are in the G20, Quad, EAS, IOR, and many other global forums. Both in India and Australia are champions in multilateral organization and multilateral process, rules-based process. So in a way, this India-Australia, if you look at in the Quad 4 countries, India, Australia, this bilateral agreement, and with Japan and India up and running, this one which is presently is not there, maybe the discussion on the table going on, then bilateral FTA with the USA. If that going to happen, then I think that 4 countries in the Quad, probably there will be partly a free flow of goods and services. we look at an Australia more from the point of view services agreement, more from the flow of our services professionals. But let me spend some time about our goods. India, as you know, that India has achieved successfully 400 million export target in the March 31st this year. India is going to 1 trillion 2030 export. And with Australia, there's 100 billion, that is the target. Presently, we had a 22 billion. This total trade, India is having a trade deficit. This deficit is widening. Perhaps then this FTA will help Indian exporters to have more exports in the Australian market. And the Consul General rightly said this India was going to get almost about 98% of 98% of tariff lines that India is going to get. There's zero duty from Australia, and on return, India will over 85% in the value terms to the Australian exports. That will enhance to 91% over the 10 years time. So this is quite futuristic, and I think if India and Australia is going to maintain this kind of a momentum, I'm sure this is going to add huge value, particularly as India's exports. If I look at more from the point of view of value chain, particularly services value chains, India and Australia bilateral trade is primarily driven by the primary goods. That's more India's imports from Australia. This is primarily cooking coal, thermal coal, and all sorts of mineral things. So, but if you look at India's exports, there are pharmaceuticals, there's iron and steel, and within bilateral FTA, both goods and services, certainly is going to give more market access. There will be new products that India will be able to export, not just gems and jewelry, or for that matter, which are very labor-intensive products. Certainly, is globally India is moving from labor-intensive towards the more capital-intensive. India is moving the vertically more labor-intensive value chain products within the capital-intensive products. So, with that, I think India-Australia bilateral FTA will help India to have more diversifications in the regions. And particularly, this is more relevant to me because there was a gap which was there in the post-RCEP phase. Way forward, what would be the benefits for the Indian companies if I look at more from the Indian side, and particularly eastern and northeastern part of India? There is the tax incentives for the Indian IT companies, as you know, that they have agreed offshore IT providers, service provider in the Australian market, they're going to get a tax benefit. So this is clearly a good deal. Please look at the text which is available on the website. So IT companies more from Kolkata and the rest part of India is going to benefit out of it, particularly in Indian companies who are already there in the Australia. Second is there are 31 sectors Australia has identified, sectors and subsectors, and Australia is going to gain out of it through trade, through investments. If there is something that India and Australia jointly can do through this bilateral FTA, it is something that I will push the trade regime, free flow, trade regime, rules-based arrangement in Indo-Pacific, in the Quad, and this is the beginning. But that's more kind of Delhi-centric, right? From Calcutta or from Guwahati or other parts of Northeast, they would be looking more from their own, which is very much, they are, which is there with them, but not too much in a Delhi or the capital. Even though somebody has written that with this bilateral FTA, I'm telling it's FTA, but please pardon me telling it's FTA because it's goods and services together. Don't read it in that way. That somebody has written in the media that with this, Canberra is going to be India's summer capital, and New Delhi is going to be Australia's winter capital. So that kind of relations actually unfolding, and obviously those who are diplomats and working with the diplomacy, they like to repeat with several footnotes. Very good. That kind of rhetoric should be there. Way forward, to me, that we need to convert this bilateral FTA into more deeper engagements. Such things, you won't get in India-Japan FTA or India-Korea FTA. India-Korea FTA, India-Japan, India-Singapore, both are comprehensive, similar like we have in Australia, but India-Japan with the 10 years phase, India-Korea 10 years phase, we have covered those are having huge apprehensions, particularly in India, because the deficit has widened. Sometimes, with an FTA in goods, you get technology as a part of an import, but then it helps you to servicification more export of services. But somehow, if you don't have very strong private sector, B2B linkages, if we are lacking in institutions and governance and institutions, particularly in the rule making and rule following, we may not get, or we may be losing out. That's what will happen in India. I don't give any blame to any industry association or the political persons, but it is a kind of a transition. So worldwide, these things happen when you are part of a developing world. To conclude my remarks, that even though we signed a bilateral, let's move into a kind of a plurilateral arrangements. Can something be done where Australia and India can take a lead in Indo-Pacific context? If we talk about a value chain linkages, what about the services areas where India has an advantages? We really do not know in the services agreement, because in the goods agreement, you have a custom notification, you agree to reduce the custom duty, you agree to reduce the non-tariff measures, standards, recognition, harmonizations. But once the deal is signed, the rules are made. Thereafter, huge work is required, particularly industry associations, standard bodies, other custodians. So they need to be engaged. So sort of, particularly looking at the eastern and northeastern dissemination of the India-Australia ACTA is very much important. So this today's roundtable that way is very, very, very effective, and I congratulate Bengal Chamber for taking it up. Last but not the least, what we should do, kind of safeguard. Sometimes when you sign a bilateral FTA, after the agreement, we often forget what happened. It is a ex-ante evaluation and ex-post evaluation we don't do in India. So once we sign the agreement, we go within further revisions after 10 years, just like with what we are doing within India and ASEAN. We realize that before signing an FTA, we have our ex-ante analysis tells you this could be your gain, just like in India, Australia has agreed to enhance its bilateral 22 billion going to be 100 billion, but in 2030. But if we fail short of that, then things that we haven't done things properly, or things are not in our hand. So always we have to be careful in terms of forecast, in terms of utilizing our existing assets, moving towards that particular direction. So what we have suggestion to the industry association and other organizations that please make sure the distributions of the benefits that this is properly done. It should not lead to a monopoly to become a further, super monopolist. No, it should lead to more benefits to the people, particularly MSMEs who are getting engaged. Australia has an added, role here. They can do things much better here to look at how the things are there or not. Engagement of states, by the way, when you do sign an agreement with another overseas country, the states actually they don't come in, right? Both from Australia and India because of the same colonial history. But things need to be changed. If you'd like to engage West Bengal or Orissa or Bihar or northeastern states, there are way forwards. We can engage the states very deeply here, and Australia can lead here, giving some best practices. They have done it in case of signing their FTA with Pacific Islands and also with New Zealand and many others. Protection, we have agreed in the FTA, Australia and India, that they will remove, with the 10 years time. But bilateral protection should not, removal of bilateral protection should get an MFN type, like that we should not create another kind of trade barriers who are not party to our bilateral FTA. That's what I mean. Many times, it becomes the bilateral FTA is basically to enhance trade It's not a political instrument, but sometimes we use it as a part of our settling equations with someone. Trade lead to specialization, right? This is the theory we know. So what kind of specializations we expect from this bilateral FTA over time? That's also we should look at it. India presently negotiating FTA with many other countries, bilateral in particular, because you need to enhance exports. And this FTA is a strategy, is a tool to enhance our export. But again, we should not forget multilateral WTO. The rules globally should guide, because multilateral enabling clause, the clause which we have Article 3 in the GATS, those actually guide the bilateral and the regional one. But what are the sectors that I think that Eastern India, Northeastern India, if you look at the statistics, I don't have often in front of me, is the horticulture sector, agricultural, natural resources, where Australia has many advantages as a technology provider. So particularly the northeastern part of India, which is rich in flora, fauna, and horticulture products. So can the Australian technology help having a global market access for those products, both in terms of packaging and standardization and recognition of standards, for example. Point number 2 is jet facilitation and connectivity. Australian investment will be very much important, particularly the ports in Kolkata and Haldia, and the new port coming up in the Bay of Bengal. So ports, SEZs, airlines industries, customs cooperation. Australia has zero tolerance against any kind of, any kind of the things which doesn't follow the standards of the customs. So customs cooperation with Australia will certainly be win-win for India, particularly Eastern and Northeastern. Bay of Bengal cooperation with Australia is not a partner of the BIMSTEC, but I think there are low-hanging fruits, where with being part of an Australia, this bilateral FTA would going to lead larger investments with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and eastern part of India. Besides tourism, education, skill development, warehousing, these are the areas immediate need, and particularly skill development and warehousing, right? If you go across anywhere in the West Bengal, particularly Southern Bengal, and in Delhi area, we'll see only thing, the jobs are there in the warehousing industries. The one which Australia's Consul office in Kolkata, they can help and Bengal Chamber jointly with the heritage, preservation of heritage and culture. So this is very important, and I don't need to overemphasize this, why it is so required. State-to-state engagements, can West Bengal and states in Australia can join hand, B2B linkages. These are the areas which we don't think there's got a space in the bilateral FTA, but certainly these are the areas where both India and Australia and Eastern, Northeastern states, they can join hand together and work for the betterment of the regions. Last conclusions, for me, that when you talk about cooperation with think tanks, research institute, universities, that I think that Crawford School of Public Policy in the University of Canberra and University of Calcutta and Guwahati, they can easily set up some chairs and some exchanges of faculties and some educational cooperations. And if Australia is thinking for a think tank, just like an Australian institute that they have in the Melbourne, if they look for Indian office, that should get a space in Calcutta, should be get a space for that. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Dey. We'll now request Mr. Hugh Boylan, Economic and Public Affairs Counsellor, Australian High Commission, New Delhi, to share the expected outcome of the FTA and the likely impact on the Indo-Australian bilateral trade.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As we enter the 75th year of India's independence, we celebrate the incredible and continuing progress of this great nation and the strengthening of the ties that bind us both together, including as proud Indo-Pacific democracies. India has no better friend than Australia, and our bilateral relationship has never been stronger. And that is especially true when it comes to the Australia-India trade and business relationship. In 2020, India was Australia's 7th largest trading partner and 6th largest export market. Two-way goods and services trade with India reached $24.4 billion. Australia's stock investment in India was $15.4 billion, and two-way foreign direct investment was $1.4 billion. Both countries are working hard to continue creating opportunities that will lead to the jobs and businesses that underpin our shared economic prosperity. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Prime Minister Modi elevated our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, or CSP, at their Virtual Leaders Summit in June 2020. The CSP covers a range of practical initiatives to boost trade and investment, which support and build on the ambitions outlined in Australia's India Economic Strategy, to which the Consul General has referred. That strategy, again, was updated in April of this year. Critically, the CSP committed both countries to recommence negotiations towards a trade agreement, and the successful conclusion of those negotiations for an interim agreement is, of course, why we're all here today. And I don't think it's necessary to emphasise just how significant this development is for the relationship. Trade and investment underpin our economies, they determine the living standards that our citizens enjoy, and they provide the agency for governments to deliver on their strategic goals. The trade agreement between India and Australia gives us an opportunity to properly harness the complementary nature of our economies, including in areas like critical minerals, professional services, education and tourism. Again, as the Consul General said, Indian consumers and businesses will benefit from the immediate elimination of tariffs on 85% of Australia's goods exports to India, while Australian consumers will benefit from almost 96% of India's goods imports entering Australia duty-free. This is an important step and a real testament to the great strength of the relationship. And both of our countries remain fully committed towards a full comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. INDOS-ECTA is a transformational deal that will create jobs and opportunities in both countries. There are great benefits to Indian business. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has noted that those benefits span both goods and services. So to use one example on the goods front, the Indian government anticipates ECTA will boost India's exports of home textiles, ready-made garments, carpets and flooring, and create additional employment opportunities for 40,000 persons a year. The Indian government estimates India's exports of textiles and apparel are expected to reach 1.1 billion in the next 3 years from the current 392 million. And the removal of Australia's tariff on imports of these goods could assist in increasing India's market share. And I've got to say, in this heat, I'm very glad to be wearing an example of India's textiles today. To look at the benefits for services professionals and mobility commitments for services suppliers, Australia has agreed to provide India with mobility outcomes consistent with our existing visa commitments made in our previous free trade agreements. This includes equivalent commitments that we've made to other partners on categories of entry, length of stay, spouses and dependents. Current sponsorship requirements for employers who want to hire overseas workers will remain after ECTA enters into force. Reflecting the importance of Australia's education exports to India, Australia has for the first time confirmed post-study work rights in a side letter to a free trade agreement and will extend access for highly sought-after science, technology, engineering and mathematics graduates. Australia will maintain the opportunities for former Indian students to live, study and work in Australia temporarily upon completion of a diploma or trade qualification, bachelor's degree, master's degree or doctoral degree. And an additional year will be available for Indians who graduate with bachelor's degrees in STEM and ICT with first-class honours. Australia will also provide, under ECTA, new access for young Indians to participate in working holidays in Australia with 1,000 places per year. India, for its part, has agreed to implement a framework to facilitate the mutual recognition of qualifications, licensing and registration procedures between professional services bodies. Australian professionals like architects, engineers and accountants will benefit as this framework will help improve the recognition of qualifications and promote two-way mobility. Australia's skilled service providers, investors and business visitors will also gain from certainty of terms of access into India, including to support their investments. Australian businesses in India will have greater clarity on visa application procedures, including periods of stay. In addition, India will provide a reciprocal work-based immigration route for Australians who successfully complete their studies and who wish to supplement their training with professional experience here in India to open up greater opportunities post-study. And of course, here it would be remiss of me not to mention the energy and resources outcomes in INDOS-ECTA. This agreement will support further growth and investment in Australia's world-leading critical minerals and resources sectors, with benefits for Indian businesses and consumers. ECTA promotes growth in Australian minerals exports to India by eliminating and reducing customs duties on key products, improving access to a growing and diversified market for Australia's critical minerals sector. As a priority strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific and as Australia's 5th largest energy and resources market, India is a major investor in Australian resources with significant and growing demand for critical minerals and other resources. Australia has development-ready critical minerals projects and is a logical choice for India in securing its supply chains. Australian firms are also well placed to meet India's growing demand for mining equipment, technology and services, and have a competitive edge in mining consultancy, exploration technologies, mining software, processing components and systems, environmental and mineral quality technology and safety equipment, as well as mining education and skills. ECTA will assist in realising the potential of the Australia economic relationship and provide certainty in the supply of high quality and competitively priced critical minerals essential to the production of high-end technologies, including for electric cars and solar panels. ECTA will build on existing partnerships and investment streams between Australia and India in critical minerals and support India's ambition to take a major role in advanced manufacturing globally. ECTA will also help to strengthen supply chain resilience and trade diversification for both of our countries. Having diverse, competitive and resilient clean energy supply chains underpinned by stable markets will be critical to meeting future demand for clean energy and for our region's economic prosperity and security. To meet its growing energy requirements, India has of course set ambitious clean energy targets, including to meet 50% of its energy requirements through renewables and the rapid expansion of electric mobility to 30% of total vehicles by 2030. Australia is in a prime position to assist. We have reserves of at least 21 of the 49 critical minerals identified as needed by the Indian government, and we can play an integral role in strengthening India's supply chains. Australia has the potential to be one of the top suppliers of cobalt and zircon to India, being in the top 3 for global production of these minerals. Under INDOS-ECTA, tariffs will be eliminated on entry into force for most critical minerals. But more broadly, to add on the resources front, and as has been noted, India's tariff on coal will be eliminated on entry into force of ECTA. Cheaper inputs to Indian manufacturing is a key outcome of ECTA, and in relation to coal, this could bring down the cost of Indian steel, increasing its competitive edge. Tariffs will also be removed on entry into force for Australian exports to India of manganese, copper, cobalt, aluminium and tin ores, titanium oxide, alumina, copper alloys, nickel and most nickel products. ECTA is a major step towards realising the promise in our economic relationship and maximising the benefits of our economic complementarities. Ladies and gentlemen, this agreement will further deepen the warm and close ties between our people by delivering increased work, study and travel opportunities. It sends a powerful signal to our businesses and investors alike that one of the biggest doors is now open to a great economic partnership. Two dynamic regional economies, two like-minded democracies, are working together for their mutual benefit and ensuring the security and resilience of our supply chains. As you know, the full realisation of the promise offered by this interim trade agreement and the comprehensive deal that will follow requires the opportunities in the deal to be taken up by business. I'm glad to have this opportunity today to outline just a few of the highlights in ECTA and how it will benefit Indian and Australian businesses and consumers alike. In the spirit of vector of unity, it's my hope that we can work to our mutual economic benefit and make the most of our complementary economies, secure our supply chains, diversify our trading partners, and chart the course of our economic futures. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Hugh Boylan. We'll now hear from Mr. Debarka Chakraborty, Principal Consultant, Dastur Company Private Limited. He will share an economic perspective with a focus on clean energy transition. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, so I have just a small presentation. Yeah, thank you. So clean energy transition. This is a much talked about phrase nowadays in the energy space and even in the larger economic space as well. Undoubtedly one of the most talked about aspect of the global economy, especially in light of climate change, ever-changing geopolitics, and the need to ensure global growth. And the need to ensure global growth, prosperity of human race. Two major democracies, Australia and India, are well placed to contributing to mitigating global climate change and gain through mutual cooperation. Madam Consul General, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I, Debarka Chakraborty from Dastur, would like to take this opportunity to provide a brief industry perspective on how the Australia-India FTA, the ECTA, can pave the way for clean energy transition for both the countries. Just a minute. So over the next 10-15 minutes, I will intend to cover the following aspects today. I thought a presentation would be nice to grab the attention. So that is one of the reasons I had this. So quickly I'll go through. The first thing is the ECT and its impact on the Indian metals and power industry. Mr. Boylan had already covered some part of it through the customs duty, free coal and the other critical minerals that India requires. The second part I will talk about the mutual cooperation towards greening the economy and how FTA is important and also what can be the next way forward for the FTA. Third is the hydrogen economy and the scope for mutual benefit. It's not mutual, it's hydrogen economy. Fourth, I will talk about the decarbonization and the concerted focus that's needed for carbon capture utilization and its storage. And finally, what needs to be done further in terms of taking the FTA forward. So first, the impact on the Indian metals and power industry. The FTA has made Australian coal, iron ore, ferrous waste and scrap customs duty and ferrous waste and scrap customs duty free for India. This is a key boost for the Indian power and steel industry. India's current and near future energy and material security will have a dependence on coal, both domestic and imported. And henceforth, this FTA will provide a major fillip for the growth of the Indian economy. Second, about the mutual cooperation towards greening the economy. So as a large economy, India is cognizant of its responsibility to reduce the emissions, the GHG emissions, and Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Modi has also committed to the net zero target for India by 2070. Several interventions would be required, including renewables and electric vehicles. India is committed to 50% electricity generation from non-fossil fuel based sources, for example, solar and wind, by 2030. This particular FTA has made silicon a key raw material in solar cells customs duty free, which is again a very good step in the right direction. On the other hand, in terms of electric vehicles, the Indian think tank Niti Aayog has already estimated that electric vehicles can help in reducing GHG emissions in the transport sector by about 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2030, which can save roughly $60 billion of diesel or petrol expenses for India in 2030. So in this respect also, the customs duty free critical minerals, as Mr. Boylan had also said, of manganese, nickel, cobalt, these are very important for India. This will help in enhancing the scope for electric vehicles and its fast adoption in the Indian transport space. Third, I will talk about the hydrogen economy. Hydrogen, all the people who are from the energy space would probably echo with me that hydrogen is touted to be the next fuel in the energy space. So it is kind of an energy vector. It's not exactly energy in itself, but it's an energy vector. It's kind of a carrier of energy. So Indian economy right now has a current demand of hydrogen of roughly 6 to 7 million tons a year, which is roughly 10% of the global demand. This demand of hydrogen in the Indian economy is expected to leapfrog, and availability of competitive availability of blue and green hydrogen is essential for Indian economy. At present, hydrogen is used in the refining sector and it's used in the fertilizer production. But with the increased usage of hydrogen, it can be used in green steel production, it can be used in power generation, it can be used in the downstream chemicals such as diethyl methyl, which again can be kind of blended in the LPG. We all are extremely concerned about the LPG prices. So there are multiple usage of hydrogen in the Indian economy, which will make Indian economy grow faster and also at a reduced cost. So in this respect, India and Australia has huge scope to partner. Australia has already taken the leap forward to be at the forefront of green hydrogen. I really congratulate the Australian federal government in this regard. They have already been considering large-scale green hydrogen hubs across the outback. Australia at present exports significant quantity of coal to the 4 Asian giants, Japan, China, South Korea, and India. So at present, this coal exports, for India itself, the coal export is roughly $3 to $4 billion a year. Out of the 27 or $30 billion of trade partnership, coal itself is roughly around 10% of that. So as Australia continues to be a large-scale fossil fuel exporter, it's also important for Australia to understand that maybe 10 or 15 years hence, the fossil fuel export may not be the big focus. So Australia has understood that already. And they have moved towards greening, to producing green hydrogen in around 3 to 4 large hubs at present. So this is a very important win-win situation for both the countries. Australia will continue to have its export slightly shifting from the fossil fuel to the green hydrogen, while India on the other hand can import Australian green hydrogen, which will help in India in fast growth. So the sectors again are very important for India are power generation, steel making, fertilizers, refining, long distance heavy trucking. This is where hydrogen can be a game changer. We are all very excited about electric vehicles, but it needs to be understood that electric vehicles batteries are mostly relevant for the short distance transport, for example cars and light vehicles. But for long distance or heavy duty trucking, hydrogen is a key imperative. So this, I believe, is a very important scope where Australia and India can probably take this sector forward. However, there are challenges. It's not a very happy story yet. Hydrogen production at scale is costly. At present, just to give a rough number, 15 million tons of green hydrogen production requires about 200 to 300 gigawatts of RE capacity, which requires funding of around 100 to 150 billion dollars of capital investment. Basically, renewable energy, when it is produced at a very cheap rate, especially in Australia where renewable is very cheap, this RE energy can be used to basically electrolyze water and produce hydrogen. But these electrolyzers are very costly. So Australia and India needs to understand and probably take a concerted efforts towards R&D to reduce this cost. Already a lot of things have been done. Australian government has already placed about 276 Australian million dollars, along with another $100 million to accelerate the development of clean hydrogen hubs. The next challenge is that hydrogen transport is costly. It's extremely, it sounds extremely well that Australia can produce hydrogen at a cheap cost, but Australia is not our neighbor, right? So this transportation of hydrogen can be a big challenge. At present, hydrogen transport through ships or pipelines has found to be very costly, and because hydrogen is not a dense material, right? So it needs to be converted to ammonia, which is higher density, and then liquid ammonia can be transported through ships. However, this is still in the very early stages. Literature suggests that Australia and Japan had some discussions early on, few years ago. However, this needs a lot more discussion and a lot more study for hydrogen to be transported for long distances. The third challenge where a lot of work needs to be done is on the policy and the regulations. Both the countries must take the FTA to the next level for hydrogen production, transport, and integrating it as actually an energy vector into both the countries' energy system. The fourth challenge, it's not a challenge, it's basically an imperative that industry should be signaled that this is coming, this is the next step. So this signaling can happen from both the countries through creating a corpus fund in this respect, through incentivizing some of the investors that hydrogen is likely going to be the next fuel. For example, at present, coal shipments come from Australia, right? Why can't hydrogen shipments come from Australia? So this could be the next game changer. Maybe in the next decade, we'll all talk about hydrogen shipments coming from the ports of Australia to the ports of India. So this is all about the hydrogen economy that I wanted to talk about. We can talk at length if we had more time. But yeah, this is the next step where the ECTA can go forward. The next topic is carbon capture, utilization and storage. So what needs to be understood is that the impact of climate change cannot be mitigated only through the focus on renewable energy, hydrogen-based energy, and electric vehicles. The reason for this is that only a third of the global GHG emissions is produced by the power sector. We are all very critical about the thermal power plants, right? That those are the huge emitters of GHG. But in reality, that is only 1/3 of the problem. The balance GHG emissions is done by roughly another 1/3 basically is done by the heavy industries, steel making, cement, fertilizers. And the rest 1/3 is mostly by the distributed emissions, which is basically the transport sector, the agriculture sector, buildings, heatings, all these things. So basically with hydrogen economy or renewable sector or electric vehicles, we are roughly challenging 40 to 50% of the entire problem. The big elephant is still the steel making, cement making, fertilizers. How do we tackle that? So here is where carbon capture comes into the picture. Globally, we need to capture a lot of carbon and then we need to sequester it as well. 50 years ago in USA, in Texas, the first carbon capture plant took off. But in 50 years, nothing much has happened. At present, we only capture roughly 0.1% of the global GHG emissions. The reason for that is quite simple. The reason is that what do we do with that carbon? We can capture carbon. We have the technology. Costs are also manageable to some extent in some of the developed countries. But what to do with the carbon? So developed countries which have oil reserves, basically they use that carbon for enhanced oil recovery. So that is a term used, EOR. I will not go into technicalities. Basically the carbon is injected deep in the oil depleted oil reserves, and then the enhanced oil recovery is done. However, that is not relevant for the countries where not much oil is there, and henceforth EOR has not, henceforth carbon capture and sequestration in countries like India where the oil reserves are scanty has not taken off. So the challenge here is to understand how to utilize that carbon dioxide, whatever we'll capture from the different emitters. So one way is to store that carbon in the geological sites. Again, for that large scale research and R&D has to be done to identify and map such locations where we can store that carbon dioxide that we have collected. The other thing is to develop some commercial products with the carbon dioxide. For example, aggregates or concrete, things like that. So this is still in the infancy. Technologies are working around it. However, some studies, some demo plants have indicated that carbon capture, which is anyway possible, the carbon storage part and the utilization part can also be done at scale. So this is where the next next play has to happen, because that is how we'll reach net zero. Because at a policy point, we can all discuss about net zero by 2050, 2060, whatever the timeline we say, but it has to be implemented, right? So for implementation, everything has to kick in. The renewable sector grow, the electric vehicles, the hydrogen economy, and finally CCUS. The International Energy Agency and the IPCC, they both have acknowledged that net zero is not possible without CCUS. So it's very important to understand the importance of CCUS here, because unless we capture CO2 and utilize and store it and make techno-economically viable business propositions to investors, CO2 capture alone will not work. And this is where the federal government's funding or corpus comes into the picture. Australia has already done a great deal of work here. They have developed a corpus fund for this. So again, they have taken a good step in that front. India at present is also working towards developing a CCUS policy. We are proud to announce that we are actually the partner with Niti Aayog in developing that CCUS policy. It is in the drafting phase at present. So let's see where it goes. It is difficult to predict when we will reach net zero. The difference will be made now over the next 5 to 10 years as countries collaborate to create a global awareness and implementable solutions for CCUS. The Australian government has launched a $250 million program to deploy carbon capture, use, and storage at scale. The government of India is also looking keenly at CCUS as part of the GHG mitigation strategy. Just a small note about the Australia's CCUS policy. The CCUS hubs and the technologies program looks to boost Australia's CCUS capabilities by, number one, encouraging domestic and international research collaborations, and second, lowering the cost of technology adoption. In this regard, Australia and India must collaborate in R&D and ensure cost reduction for CCUS. The key challenge of CO2 utilization, which is the major present impediment, should be negated through concerted R&D efforts. This is all I had from CCUS, and now I'll try to collate everything and say what can be done. A lot of things has been done in the ECTA, which has been a historic FTA between two of the greatest democracies on this planet. However, the next step could be three things which we have written, we believe at present. The first is that a clean energy and hydrogen fund should be created for mutual benefit. Rough estimates indicate that India needs roughly $35 to $50 billion by 2040 to reduce its GHG emissions by 50%, which is a huge sum, to be honest. Australia has already estimated that $19 billion is required for their net zero fund. So clearly it shows that a lot more federal funding is needed to kickstart the process of decarbonization. Investors and industries must be made aware that business alignment needs to be reworked without impacting the socio-economic prospects. The coming decade thereafter can be towards carbon pricing or taxing the polluters and so on. So basically what I'm trying to say is that in the coming decade, over the next 5 to 10 years, we cannot make a rampant movement to decarbonization, because that will impact our industries, it will impact our investors. We cannot just stop or close down thermal power plants. We cannot just take off cars from the roads, right? So what is important is to understand that the next decade, till 2030 at least, India at least should consider a corpus fund, some kind of a grant for signaling investors or industries to move towards a carbon-free economy. Thereafter, as we mature this corpus from 2030 or 35 onwards, then we can start taxing the emitters. We can start introducing carbon tax, carbon pricing, as the developed countries like US or UK are doing. That's what we can do thereafter. So henceforth, it should be a step-by-step process, but the process needs to start now with government initiating the process. The next thing that should be done is at a government level, there should be, the institutions should consider knowledge sharing, like Niti Aayog in India and its counterpart in Australia should consider knowledge sharing and transfer of critical infrastructure for, one, development of green hydrogen economy, and second is CCUS. This has to be complemented with low cost electrolysis for production of hydrogen, RE growth in Australia, ensuring that hydrogen production happens at a relatively low cost of say $2 per kg at present, which is above $5 per kg. It has to come down to say $2 per kg. Then only hydrogen can become competitive and can replace the normal, the alternatives which are present right now. The third thing that needs to be done is that Australia and India needs to work on the logistics of hydrogen transportation, which I had already touched upon. Critical area of concern could be hydrogen transfer from Australia to India. Here, the important factors to consider is that whether it should be converted to ammonia and then transported, what are the cost implications, who are the stakeholders who should be considered for the contracting part, the risk reward mechanism, and all these aspects. So over a time, hopefully over the maybe a decade or so, we will see hydrogen shipments instead of coal shipments. So this is all I had. Just a brief snapshot of how we are working around this. So at Dastur Energy, we are a clean energy transition company. We have been working in this space for almost a decade now. We are also a big player in the engineering space. We work primarily in the metals, mining, power, energy sector for now over 65 years. We have been working with the US. So yeah, so this is kind of a journey. So a lot of text, but just look at the red colored highlighted text. So basically over the last 5-7 years, we have been working a lot with the US Department of Energy, with the Indian oil marketing companies like BPCL, IOCL. We have been working with Abu Dhabi oil marketing company. So we have been working on commercial scale gasification complex, about funding CCUS, developing industrial scale carbon capture projects, so all these aspects. So this is something which is very close to our heart, and we believe this is the next way forward in the clean energy space. Yeah, these are some of the projects. I can just quickly skip through. So yeah, so that's all I had. So just to conclude, clean energy transition is a reality if the climate change needs to find an answer. The answer lies not just in technology and costs, but global collaboration and partnerships between like-minded countries like Australia and India. So as expressed by our Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji, our relationship is based on 4 Ds: democracy, defense, diaspora, and dosti. So may I just humbly add to that Honorable Prime Minister's line that dosti is beyond cricket, and it delves deep into ensuring economic growth and prosperity of these 2 great democratic nations. Thank you.
Hello. So we would request, if there is an interactive session you would like to have, we'd request our President to please chair. However, Mr. Hugh Boylan will have to leave the venue by 4:15 because he has a flight to schedule. Yeah.
Thank you. Consul General Rowan Ainsworth, Hugh Boylan, Debarka Chakraborty, and Mr. Dr. Prabir, who joined online. Thank you very much for being part of this session, and my personal apologies for not able to reach here in time. I think I missed some valuable information that the Consul General had to share with us. Right on the 3rd of April, I think, when this news was reported that India and Australia was entering into an FTA, I suggested to the Director General of Bengal Chamber that we should have a seminar, because this is something that's going to have a long-term, it's going to change the India-Australia equation significantly in the long term, and I'm happy that the Secretariat has managed to organize this at very short notice. Very interesting discussions, because now we are discovering what we can do having these arrangements in place. So let me, since Hugh Boylan has to leave in 5 minutes' time, so let me put a question to him and saying that traditionally Australia has been a big exporter of minerals and other raw materials to India. Say 10 years from now, which area do you think would be the biggest sector of trade between the countries?
Oh, you're asking me to use a crystal ball. I think that the first thing that I think will remain a major source of trade between our countries is education. I think that'll build on both sides, and I think that this agreement is an important part of formalising and providing additional stepping stones to making sure that that major engagement continues. And I certainly hope it does, because to talk about Dosti as part of the relationship, I think that the relationships between students facilitates a cultural exchange that I think has built too much of the goodwill between our countries. I would also hope that renewables, clean energy and critical minerals are among the things that we trade and grow our trade in. And I would note, just in response to your presentation, sir, that when the Consul General was talking about the package of initiatives and the $280 million investment that the Australian government has made in our relationship, one of the parts of that is a India-Australia Green Steel Partnership, which will see the Australian agency CSIRO working with Indian counterparts on innovative technologies to hopefully continue to build jobs, research and understanding in that sector. So I hope that along with some of the critical minerals that both of us referenced, will increasingly become... I thought it was working. I'm quite loud anyway. Look, I'm hopeful that those things will certainly form a part of our trading futures. Will they be the major ones? I don't know. We're seeing new technologies developed all the time. So I'd hope that in a trading relationship as robust as this one, we continue to future-proof it and make sure that we have trading rules well into the future that bind us together and form a part of the rules-based international order. And that will include on things like lithium, which, as we know, is a central input into solar PV panels, into semiconductors, all of these sorts of things that are important both to our energy futures and our economies and also to our security. So I think there's a lot of options there, and I think that one of the reasons why we need to make sure we make good on our commitment to negotiate the full comprehensive economic cooperation agreement is to know that we've laid a pathway to seize those opportunities as we move forward. Thank you again for having me, and I'm very sorry that I have to go to the airport. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We would request Mr. Debarka Chakraborty to please present a token of appreciation to Mr. Hugh Boylan. We would request Mr. Anirudh, our past president, to please present a token of appreciation to Mr. Rowan Ainsworth. I would request our president, Mr. Prabir, to please present token of appreciation to Mr. Debarka Chakraborty. From the Bengal Chamber, we would like to thank Mr. Debarka Chakraborty and Mr. Rowan Chatterjee, who has supported us in presenting this session further. Mr. Debarka Chakraborty, the CEO and Managing Director of Ecotech Ventures Private Limited and Special Invited of the Managing Committee of the Bengal Chamber, and Mr. Rowan Chatterjee is the Mentor and Partner of TCM Global and Economic Advisory Services LLP and the Chairperson of Indirect Tax Committee, the Bengal Chamber. So, we are closing this session here. Thank you for joining us.